Well, my first graduate was architecture. Yeah? I was a student, and I graduated from architecture in Indonesia. You have the education of architecture is a part of technical faculty. It's not humanities. Like in France, you have School of Architecture, which is completely outside the system, engineering school or humanities. It's special school of architecture. In Indonesia, architecture is a part of engineering. So I am at the same time engineer, architect. In engineering, you have civil engineering, architectural engineering, etc. So I'm a part of the School of Engineering, and I am in architecture. Why then architecture? Because I like at the same time art and mathematics. I was strong in mathematics when I was in high school. And also I was fond of art. I mean, when I was young. Since I was child, I wrote already poems, short stories. So since I was young, I have already published short stories for children along my life. In fact, I was writing following my ages. So I started by writing stories for children, poems, and then for the youth, how do you say, adolescent, teenagers, and then etc. So at the same time, I was strong in literature, in fine art, because I liked also design, drawing, etc. And in mathematics, I was strong also in mathematics. So I had a kind of a dream in order to be able to construct, to build something. So it's imagination with art and mathematics or geometry. So this combination of geometry and art, fine art and literature. So finally I decided to go to School of Engineering, Architecture. And during my so I have to say that I have passed multiple crises in my life. Personality, identity. Why? Since I was very early learning culture, literature. So I mean, I was more advanced than my comrade in this field. So I felt that in high school, well, I was in mathematics in high school. I don't know in China, but you have literature, we have social, and you have science. I mean, mathematics, biology, chemistry, physics, etc. So I'm in this field, and I always felt that my comrades is just they ignored the art. They ignored. They didn't know anything about imagination, about art, about literature. They are strong in specialization in mathematics, physics, chemistry, but they ignored completely the side of humanities. So I felt that it is empty. And I was not satisfied as well by our teachers in school as well. They of course technically they are performant, but their teaching didn't bring me to beyond this world, this specialization. So of course this is crisis when I was a teenager. So I tried to find to find a way to satisfy my personal personal interest. So then I joined the literary groups, writing poems and reading poesy in one of our street in Yogyakarta, my hometown, where a group of there was let's say a master of poesy who has a sense of pedagogy, and with the young writers get together discussing and reading poems, etc. So this is my first escapism from this not escapism but crisis that I succeeded to how do you say, to overcome. So I passed my high school with a good mark, which allowed me to go to School of Architecture, because to enter School of Architecture you have to have a background of mathematics, physics, chemistry, and of course a sense of art, etc., because it is selected and you have to pass by several tests, general tests, and then design, etc. So I was in architecture. But then the second crisis, of course, it's always a recurrent crisis like capitalism. Because the same feeling that, you know, that most of the student in architecture is prestigious, so most of the students are middle class, of course, and they are sometimes snobs, and they don't know nothing about literature, but because their background is mathematics or geophysics, etc. So again, I felt that it's really it is empty. I mean that it didn't satisfy my thirst for something more holistic. Let's say. So it was in the 1970s, and it was also the crisis, not the crisis, but the period of Suharto, which the strongest period of Suharto, where students' movement, the first student movement happened, and then started the oppressive measures by Suharto regime. And I saw the tank entered into the campus, university. Some of our colleagues, how do you say, tortured by the army, etc. So, and all the student organization, student activities were banned. So this is very interesting period, because this is the period also, as you see, theology of liberation in Latin America, and you know that this is the period since the students were oppressed in campus, and the idealist students, of course, they try to find a way to concretize their dream or their ideal. So this is the period also where, so there are several ways to satisfy. One, to religions, and the other is let's say alternative, non-religious alternative. And that is interesting things that under Suharto, although the government is very oppressive, but revolutionary literature was entered. It is possible. Of course, the official name like Marx, etc., is banned. But we got imagine that the books like Theology of Liberation, which were published in Latin America, translated in Indonesia, and go into the youth, and the period of literature like Ivan Illich, Paulo Freire, etc., was translated into Indonesian, and also revolutionary literature in Islam, like from the 79 is Islamic revolution in Iran. So you have literature of Ali Shariati, of Bani Sadr, Khomeini, Said Qutb. So literature of Muslim brotherhoods and of Iranian revolution also entered. So you see, this is the period of, let's say, boiling period for the looking for alternative. But it's also correspond to the West, in the West, that after 68 revolution of youth. So many students were going to villages. So now, instead of making activities in the city, and they went to villages, working with the farmers, with what is called at the time, the period of Schumacher, like small is beautiful, and also appropriate technology approaches. So from technical engineering school, they have the capacity to do appropriate technology approach to apply it in the villages for energy, electricity, irrigation, waters, etc. And also in Islamic boarding school, who importing the ideas of Islamic revolution. They go to Islamic boarding schools in villages, working with the students, the student of the Islamic boarding schools, etc., etc. So myself, I went home, my hometown, which was, in fact, it was a traditional town, which the population were majority craftsmen of silver, craftsmen and garment and batik. So my hometown is in fact the traditional city where you have a strong, it is very strong communist party in my hometown, because there are a lot of workers in small industries, of course. But the Communist Party is very strong before 65, because majority of the people are workers. So there are some let's say traditional capitalists, and then workers. So the destiny of these workers never improved, since because it is a capitalist, traditional capitalist system linking with the family, feudalism, etc., etc. And also, of course, this after the destruction completely communism in Indonesia, nobody defend them, these small workers, because the trade union are completely destroyed, etc. So there's no defender of these small workers. So I tried to do something with them through training, but after several years organizing things to do theater with the youth, etc. But after some times, I think it's hopeless. I mean, there's no possible change. The change must be from macro. It is impossible to change at the grassroots level. So this is so I this period I abandoned universities for doing like other youth students in the villages. They left university So I left for some years university to do this social work. And then I came back after I felt that it's enough, because finally I don't see any light to get out of this situation. So I get back, I go back. It's better that I finish my my graduation. Anyway, this is so I go back. I went back to university to continue my study in architecture. And by chance, one of my professor is a priest, Catholic priest, but he was architect. Because when he was young in seminary, he was a talented person. He was a talented young, designing, etc. So when he was a priest, then the bishop, the Catholic bishop, designated him to be architect. So he was sent to School of Architecture in Bandung, and then sent to Germany, to Aachen, to study architecture. So he is at the same time a priest, architect, and writer. And he is, of course, a priest, very close to theology of liberation. So this is the first time also in Indonesia that a priest decided to live outside the how do you say, the priest house, to live in the slums area. So then he, of course, I was become his assistant, and he invited me to join. So we work. I was a student, he is my professor. We work on slum area to build together the houses with the people. And it was the period of the strongest period of Suharto. We work on the river bank, slums area in Yogyakarta. And there was a project to clean up these slums areas in order to have a beautiful park using this river. While we were there, then the priest, of course, he is our. Since he is priest, of course, he has very strong bargaining position, because he is a functionary of the Pope. So if something happened to him, of course, a reaction will be international. So we defended the squatters settlement on the slum area. We built, our ideas is that instead of sending them to outer islands of, Sumatra, because the idea of government is that to put these people, to send them to Sumatra as transmigration. So we didn't agree that they are informals. They are hero of development, because they are very productive people. They are garbage, or they say collectors. They make recycling. They clean the rivers, because they live on the bottom of the river, etc. And they make the life of the people cheaper, because they provide works. Human manpower cheaper. They sell food. They sell their manpower cheaply, so that it means that the tariff life is lower in my hometown. So they are useful. And it is better to solve the problem on site rather than sending them out. What we needed was to make their houses more healthy, more beautiful, etc. So that's why we transform the houses with bamboo on steel, and we paint. We mobilize the student from art schools to design the houses, etc. And it was under the bridge along the river, so you can see the houses. They become beautiful. And then we got the support from intellectuals, from artists, etc. They come down to the slums area to work together with people. And several years later, we got the prize of Aga Khan of architecture for this project. So this is the period which I mean, my engagement in social movement is starting from this crisis, personal crisis, and finally I finished my school of architecture. I was an architect engineer, so while working as practicing architect, at the same time I'm still working with the slums areas. And then it happened that there was every year there was a training for housing policy, housing provided by the government, but also because this is a project of a kind of wood bank, etc., for housing improvement, etc. So I got fellowship to study housing studies in the Netherlands, in Institute for Housing Studies in Rotterdam. There I met the first meeting with the international communities of students, and many of them from Latin America, from Asia, from Africa. Especially from Latin America, they are revolutionary, of course, from Cuba, from Venezuela, from Brazil, etc. Yeah, this is in 87. So I was I was alone from Indonesia, which proposed a working paper on my experiences in the slum area, because other Indonesian fellow, they are from the government, from the Ministry of Public Works, etc., etc. So I was alone. So my paper was considered very interesting and relevant. So I was invited for the second time to the Holland, to the Netherlands. At the same time, it is also the period of a French NGO, maybe you know, Comité Catholic Committee Against Hunger and for the Development, which was also revolutionary, let's say leftist Catholic. So they were looking for collaboration, partnership with Indonesian NGOs working in the. So they contacted me, so we met, and they promised me to give a fellowship to study in France. This policy, I think, is very intelligent, these French NGOs. Now there's no more. Intelligent because, in fact, they give very selected people, activists from Africa, Asia, Latin America to study in France, sometimes until doctoral studies. They invest on human resources instead of giving to projects, development project, etc. But of course, development project they give, but also they select activists to be financed for their study. So I was one of them. So second time I was in Holland, and at the same time I was in contact with France. So just after Holland, I went back to Indonesia 1 month, and then studies in France. It was in 89, at the end of 89. So starting from 89, I studied in France for my PhD. And my studies is this is another things. My interest, of course, when I studied in France, abroad, I always said that we should not study Indonesia when we studied abroad, because it means that we just provide our data from Indonesia to France or to other countries. I should study other country. So then I studied Egypt. I studied Egypt. my idea is that I have to take advantage of my background, that I am from Muslim societies, I know Arabic, and I have also intellectual heritage since my grandfather, my granduncle, they studied in Egypt. So I have a heritage of this intellectual heritage of Egypt, 19th century, 20th century, revolutionary Egypt, etc. So I wish that I can trace back my intellectual heritage in Egypt. So then when I studied in France, I decided to study Egypt, and then, but what is the subject or object of my research? Since I have a background of architecture, town planning, so it must be a city, or some cities, how cities transform, evolve in Egypt, and the relation with Islam, of course, with this Islamism, of course, because it is the period where Islamism also rising, and also how is the Islamism in architecture, in urban planning? Is there any Islamism in the discourses of Islamism, that the Islamic house must be like this or like that, that Islamic city must be planned in this way, etc. This, I was curious if there is a discourse and reality of this Islamism in architecture. But I have to find the object. What is the object then? By chance, when I was studying in Holland in '89, we had a study excursion, and it was visiting housing projects in Egypt, in Ismailia. Ismailia is in the middle of Suez Canal. You know, Canal Suez Canal. There are three cities: Port Said in the north, Ismailia in the middle, and Suez in the south. And Port Said, there Samir Amin was grown up. Port Said. So Ismailia, with other students, we visited Ismailia, and then we made a contact with the colleagues of housing project in Ismailia. So then, why not? I studied Ismailia with the perspective of the evolution of these cities of Suez Canal, because the Suez Canal was digged by a French company, and then Anglo French, Franco-Britannic. So how these cities, who were founded by European companies with ideas of 19th century rationalism, positivism, but also colonial period segregation of Arabic neighborhood, European neighborhood, Greek neighborhood, etc., with the houses, exotic European colonial houses, and inhabited by the European functionaries. At the same time, you have Arab neighborhoods, etc. How were these three cities of Suez Canal was transformed by the Egyptian? Because 1956, the nationalization of Suez Canal, where the foreigners were forced to get out from the cities of Suez Canal, and the Egyptian, they enter into the cities and they occupied the beautiful houses, the cities, etc. How these cities of Suez Canal was transformed. So the confrontation or the ideas of Western ideas, Christianity, and then now Islamic traditional houses. So how the culture of cities or the culture of houses of Egyptian now transform these cities created by the French. So this is my idea. So transform. So that's the title was architectural and social transformation of cities in the Suez Canal since the foundation of the cities until period of Mubarak, when my last research. So this is the this is my study. When I finished my PhD thesis, it was the crisis in Asia, 1997, economic crisis. And Indonesia was one of those which is most, how do you say, seriously damaged by this crisis. So my friend, activist, I was not engaged by any university or academic institution in Indonesia. I was just activist that by chance I got fellowship to study in France. So I didn't have any attachment to any institution in Indonesia except moral engagement with my NGO. So my friends activists, they said, if you go back to Indonesia, you will not have job, and we don't have money, and we need your help to make a network for us. So if you have job in France, please stay there. And by chance, before I finished, in fact, since 1995, I have been teaching while finishing my PhD. So then, okay, then I have a certain comfort that I will not be a traitor for my Indonesian activists. So then I stay because I have a job. So I applied to be a permanent staff. So that's from 1995. And then in 2000, I was recruited as a permanent staff until today. So I am the only Indonesian citizen who is also at the same time French civil servant, because I belong to Ministry of National Education in France. It is possible foreigners become a civil servant in France to fit in research or in higher education. Like my colleagues from China, from Japan, from Korea, they also permanent staff, and it is possible. So then I am now a civil servant in France, and I think it is also good in the sense that there's lack of Indonesian academics or intellectual who occupy strategic position in Western universities. So I'm almost alone as Indonesian academics who work in French university as a permanent staff and have a responsibility, etc., etc. So that's yeah. So my engagement, of course, especially with Africa. From my studies in Egypt, then also little by little I learned that from paleoanthropology, from genetics, that our ancestors came from Africa. And then we are all from African. So then, while the most, let's say, suffering continent is Africa, so I always say to our friend, I found a justification for my attachment to Africa, that our ancestors, although I always said I am not African, but our ancestors came from Africa. So I am a part of African diaspora in the world since 50,000 years ago. Because when we trace back the migration from Homo sapiens from East Africa, the first destination is Asia, and they arrived in Australia 50,000 years ago. So took 10,000 years from East Africa until Australia. Now it's around 18 hours by flight. But at the time, imagine our ancestor dragging the, how do you say this, axis from Africa until Australia, 10,000 years. So that's why Indonesia was the first population African types that we see the trace in Papua. So when our ancestor get out from Africa, first destination Asia, then some went up to China and then to the Central Asia and to Europe and to Latin America, and thousands of years they separated each other. They become white in Europe, become yellow in China, and stay black in equatorial zone. So 10,000 years ago, the Chinese came down to Indonesia. The Mongoloid came down to Indonesia, and they mixed with this Negroid people. And I am a result of this mix of Afro-Asiatic, of Mongoloid and Negroid people. This is my, let's say, how do you say, justification for my engagement for Africa.
I think you don't need to add the justify, because I think it's really good that there could be the Asia-Africa links, and now and also strengthening links with Latin America.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
The way we share the 500 years.
Yeah. It is difficult for me to previously, in my step of my engagement with Africa, it is difficult for me to justify that we should engage Latin America. Why? Because broadly speaking, a very quick perception, Latin America, like Australia, it's just the extension of European civilization. I mean, that's what my first idea, of course, that among the continents in the world, only Asia and Africa, that they are not uprooted from Western civilization. They have still their root. While in Latin America, the indigenous people, they are massacred completely, and the people are replaced by European stock of people, including Australia. So they become a kind of extension of imperialism, even until recently, Latin America, their model is of always Europe. So what is really authentic, which is not based on Western civilization, is Asia and Africa. That's what's my. I was a bit difficult to engage Latin America in our movement, but little by little I learned, of course, that there's also the Latin America, this the changes in Latin America, changes of orientation, that their ideal is not Europe anymore. So this is, and of course the theology of liberation, etc., developed in Latin America. So yes, Latin America as a part of this tricontinental movement. Yeah, but yet, it's a long time. Focus. I mean, I have to focus really to the continents who has really different from Western civilization, because in Latin America you have the same language, the same religion still, mostly Spanish language or Portuguese, and mostly Catholic people. They share. Linked very closely, of course, with Europe. Australia is the same. They are under British until now. The government of Australia is under the British Kingdom, and the people also they are white people, and so Australia, Latin America, North America is a kind of extension of Western civilization. Yeah, but of course, yeah.
I think for the elite especially.
Yeah.
And I think there's also still the remnants.
Yeah.
That those that remain not yet eliminated
Yeah.
by the West. So we've a lot of the indigenous people.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
origins,
Yeah.
And so we still see some heritage.
Yeah, exactly.
But then you said your grandparents, your grandfathers studied in Egypt. That was quite.
Yeah, because I came from merchant family, Muslim merchant family. During the colonial period, the indigenous people like me, like the Javanese, they didn't have access to education, to modern education. Because the Dutch, they didn't give possibility to study in higher learning. So they send their children to study abroad, to the let's say modernized Muslim countries, which was Egypt 19th century, the most modernized Muslim countries in the world, in Muslim countries, Egypt, since 19th century. Samir Amin can speak a lot. That the Egyptian development in the historical perspective or global history of Samir Amin is one of the rise of the South. I mean, Egypt in 19th century was sovereign. I mean, Egypt was governed by viceroy from Ottoman Empire, from Turkey, but autonomous enough so that at that time Muhammad Ali, the 19th century governor of Egypt, who has brilliant ideas to develop Egypt by using European engineer, etc., but under the command of Muhammad Ali. So this is the modernization of Egypt took place along the 19th century, and then the awakening of Islamic thinkers, etc., along the 19th century Egyptian. The key is that the governor has a sovereign project to develop Egypt. That's why Egypt is one of the rising, the rise of the South in the perspective of Samir Amin. Yeah. And then many students from Islamic Muslim countries like Indonesia, they send their children to study in Egypt. So we have 4 grand uncles studying in Egypt, and from Egypt then they send to Europe. You know, from Indonesia it's very difficult to go directly to Europe. So they first study in Cairo. Cairo is a very cosmopolitan city in 19th and the beginning of 20th century. So from Cairo, then they get contact with the universities in Europe, in France, in Holland, etc. So from Egypt, they studied in France and in the Netherlands. So this is.
So from your grandparents, they were already educated in that way.
Yeah.
And your father?
My father was school teacher in Islamic organization called Muhammadiyah. Is one in Indonesia. You have 2 biggest Islamic organization, Muhammadiyah and Nahdlatul Ulama. And Muhammadiyah is modernist movement. They built schools, hospitals, and my father is one of the activists to found a primary school to teach indigenous people outside the system of Dutch colonial education. But then he has all doing business at the same time, because you know that from the religious organization you didn't get salary, so they have to work at the same time. So my father has a a company of a small company of small enterprises of garment, of making confection. Yeah. So since I was young, I look how to sew the cloth, etc. So I learned, and when I was a student, I work outside my school. I work in a tailor to sew the cloth, the shirt, the trousers, etc. Yeah.